Obviously, Max Keiser does need no introduction, but he's the inventor of the Hollywood Stock Exchange virtual trading system, a virtual specialist technology, prediction markets, Hollywood Stock Exchange, and the list goes on and on. TV host with BBC, RT, Al Jazeera, Press TV, Genesis radio host Saturdays. It just goes on and on. Has a radio talk show in England, max-keiser.com, and he joins us to break down these big new developments with the global markets. He's predicted all of this, and so have we, but now it's here. Why is this happening, and how big of a deal is it, Max Keiser?
Well, the volume on these exchanges is collapsing, so they have to merge. And the legitimate volume, most of the volume on the New York Stock Exchange is the U.S. government itself buying stocks to keep volumes on these exchanges. The actual underlying participation by the average person is just not there anymore because the economy is collapsing and the folks are not participating in the stock market like they used to. So there's huge mergers going on, and now you've got this international merger with the German Bourse and the New York Stock Exchange coming together, and an attempt to resuscitate a dying model. The pre-market capitalism is dying. It's being replaced with Politburo-style command and control economic modeling from the Fed, and now the global Fed, which is in the pipeline. We learned that at Davos. They're going to come up with a new $100 trillion credit line and a global bank and a global currency because competition is dead. Nobody wants to compete anymore. They all want to be little dictators. So they've gotten rid of that concept, and now they pull this off. They've got to merge these exchanges and create just 2 or 3 super exchanges.
Is that not just more layering of the debt, pushing the band car, SDR? You'll still have regional currencies, but they're going to be based in that new digital currency, and that gives them a new level to the Ponzi scheme. But how much time does that buy?
Well, it rolls all the current debts into a new global $100 billion debt facility, and as a way to prevent a collapse, but as countries lost their individual sovereignty during the creation of the euro, this means that countries like the U.S. lose its sovereignty with the creation of a global central bank and currency of some type. And I think my preference is the SDR. I think will become increasingly more the special drawing right, which is already being used globally as a global currency. It gets bigger and is used more by countries around the world. Other people have different views on this, but I think the SDR is going to see that grow this year. And of course, the resistance is on the street pushing back. So you've got your audience, and your audience, you're constantly asking the question, when will folks in the U.S. wake up? Well, they've woken up in Egypt, and they woke up in Tunisia, and they're waking up around the world. So the global insurrection against the banker occupation is alive and well.
Well, we did predict 3 years ago, and since then, incessantly, that there would be global food riots and overthrow of governments. This is a complex issue. People say, well, Alex, the news is reporting that the U.S. government funded the Muslim Brotherhood and al-Baghdadi and the other factions and did trigger this 3 weeks ago. Well, then how are you saying it's a real insurrection if they triggered it? They recognize the climate. They recognize that the dominoes are now set. They don't want it to fall over triggered by real domestic groups. They artificially trigger it to then be able to try to steer it. The question is, will they be successful in doing that? And where do you see this global insurrection going? Obviously, it's triggered first in countries where half the population's making $2 a day or less and people are starving. Food riots are spreading. How do you see these dominoes falling?
Right. So in Egypt, the number 2 guy who supposedly is taking over, Mubarak, is a CIA-friendly chap who clearly would not make the situation better. But the people on the ground, the people in the street, are pretty knowledgeable about this, so they're not going to accept that. And so that's the way revolution is. Now, this revolution is growing in scope and in size because now the workers across the country have gone on strike as of yesterday. You've got workers around the Suez Canal and in other parts of the country on strike. And when the workers go on strike, that's usually generally a huge step toward a successful revolution. And the intelligence that's being passed around is great because of the Internet And the country, of course, tried to hit the Internet kill switch, but after 3 days, they realized that it's very difficult to hit the Internet kill switch without also hitting the economic kill switch. So they had to turn it back on. So this is something that's been exploited by the insurrectionists, and it's the same all over the world.
Well, that's because we're now in industrialized world, and certainly with communications, Egypt is industrialized, not in many other respects, that now we are dependent on it. This is how we communicate. This is how the markets now move. This is how people purchase a lot of things. This is what businesses are based on. And so the globalists have built the web as a surveillance grid, but now the populations are seizing it as a tool of liberty. And more I see the Internet truly transcending what it was originally built for as a control tool. And I see this as one of the biggest cases of something backfiring on the New World Order.
Well, you yourself have hacked the attempt to control the Internet by doing the Google bomb. Okay, so the Alex Jones InfoWars audience, they launched a Google bomb, and it bypasses all the controls to keep the media sweet on a very narrow definition of what is news on that particular day. Now, I think going forward in the United States, if I can project what might happen in the U.S., which fall into the category of an insurrection or a revolution, similar to what we're seeing in Cairo and in Tunis, I'm reading that more and more people in the U.S. whose houses are now underwater with the huge mortgages, and the price of the real estate is down.
They're just staying in the homes.
Well, there's they have the option in the U.S. of what's called jingle mail. You leave the keys to the house in the mail, and you walk away from your mortgage. And people have selectively done this. And people in government have talked about, produce the note, where's the note, foreclosure gate. The banks that are involved in the foreclosure, they missold the mortgages to begin with. They mispackaged the mortgages, etc. But what I'm hearing is that there is more and more of an idea where you could have 1 million mortgage to walk away on one day. So 1 million homeowners, or maybe just 100,000 homeowners, but possibly 1 million homeowners coast to coast in America, they pick a date in the future, 2 months from today, let's say, and they say on that day, 100,000 of us or 200,000 of us will simultaneously walk away from our underwater home, our bad mortgage. Now, if that goes forward, then that will completely destroy the banking cartel in a huge way. And they're using the social networking sites, and they're using the Facebook and the Twitter to organize a mass movement in that way. So that could be America's version of to participate in the global insurrection against banker occupation.
I want to expand on something. The head of the Energy Department has announced yesterday that they are going to, quote, shut down massive numbers of power plants in the U.S. Last Friday, the White House, on the front page, responded to our story about how they're shutting down other power plants but letting GE have a waiver and keep theirs open and expand new ones. So regardless of where you stand on global warming, this is selective energy shutdowns for the guys that are on the inside of the cartel. That's what Ceausescu did for his own profit, more than tripling prices and shutting down his competition in Romania. That's directly what led to his overthrow. We're seeing rebellions all over the world now, including in China, over people's electricity cutting in and out. But the fact that the White House now has to respond to us, that really does show the power of the alternative media.
Well, you mentioned Enron earlier, and what happened in California a few years ago, they just went ahead and jacked up rates and caused a tremendous amount of pain just by gouging prices to manipulate the prices. And what's going on in Texas right now with the power outages, I would not be surprised to find out that this is, in fact, just more of the same kind of price gouging, energy companies gouging prices for profit. But looking at the whole situation from a more broader perspective, remember that when the U.S. went off the gold standard in 1971, they adopted what was called the petrodollar standard. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia had a quid pro quo, that the U.S. would buy lots of oil from Saudi Arabia if they recycled that money through the U.S. economy. And this gave birth to a tremendous 30-year period of growth of globalization and growth of credit to finance this globalization. That would be the growth of the dollar as the world reserve currency. Now, starting in 2007, we know that we had a credit crunch. Lehman Brothers went bad. Goldman-Sachs almost went bust. If it weren't for Hank Paulson bailing them out for Congress. Banks all over the world almost went bust. Because all the credit that's been created since 1971, the globe hit peak credit. They had all the credit saturation. You can't absorb any more credit. And this is the story that it's impossible, no matter how much more money that Bernanke creates, they cannot re-stimulate the economy to go back to where they were 10 and 15 years ago, which means that in the energy patch, which has been codependent, growing codependently along with the credit growth, is also in a contraction phase. So Saudi Arabia just came out 2 days ago. They said that they've been overstating their reserves by 40%, which we reported on in our Al Jazeera English film 4 years ago. The energy supplies of these three major fields, the Ghawar in Saudi Arabia, Cantarell in Mexico, and Bergen in Kuwait, have all been in rapid decline. Mexico is now an oil importer. The UK is now an oil importer. Egypt, just this year, became an oil importer. That's part of the reason why now inflation's running high and the people are on the streets, because the entire energy sector, along with the credit sector, take those two together, they're both collapsing. They're coterminous. You've got a credit and energy collapse simultaneous, and the people are simply at the end of their tether. They're on the street now, and it's no going back, because you're never going to get the credit back, and you're not going to get those reserves back at that price.
Well, Max, all the analysts I respect, going back when I really woke up 18, 19 years ago, I've been on air 16 years, said that the globalists are going to flood the world with derivatives. I mean, I was talking about this 13 years ago. I had economists like George Humphrey on 12 years ago who broke down everything that's now happened with total precision. He wrote books about how it was going to unfold, that the globalists would sell globalism through all this fiat fraudulent wealth they made, but that they planned to implode it later, cause world revolution, but actually misdirect it against the nation states themselves, bring the world into greater crisis, just like the IMF and World Bank do in third world countries, triggering the IMF riot, as they call it, and then offer their global currency as the solution. That's what Davos did, as you know, 2 weeks ago with the $100 trillion they want of taxpayer money to save us. They'll then leverage it at least 10 times to $1 quadrillion. I mean, this has really been an organized system because it's on paper that they organized it. I mean, do you disagree that the big central banks have planned all of this?
No, I don't disagree, because any money that has interest attached to it, there's an incentive to flood the market with as much of it as possible, because you're always ahead of the curve in terms of the amount of interest you can collect versus any liability associated with the debts you're incurring. So money with interest attached is something that these banks and these central banks flood the globe with, because they know it's a soft imperial conquest. They don't need it. You know, when people talk about the currency wars that are going on now, the U.S. is using artificially cheap U.S. dollars to try to interfere in foreign governments' affairs and to take control of property and wealth using cheap dollars. They know full well that when the dollar eventually collapses, that they will have assets to show for those dollars. So the soft dollar with currency with interest rates attached to it is something that is flooded into the market as a way of controlling those markets.
And the Chinese have the incredibly soft yuan to underpin the United States and deindustrialize us.
Well, that's part of the currency war. Now, what's coming out recently with Robert Zoellick now coming out and saying we're going to look at gold again, and with J.P. Morgan just recently said that they're going to recognize gold bullion as collateral for derivatives for the first time they've made that statement. So now suddenly gold and silver are being talked about in terms of a currency. And this hasn't been on, and the central banks for the past 30 years have been net sellers of gold. Now they're net buyers of gold. So this is now setting the stage for this huge showdown between which country has the most gold. And, of course, the U.S. purportedly has 8,000 tons. China has only 1,000 tons. Germany has 3,000 tons, but 66% of that is held in New York. And as was the point made recently by a very, very smart guy, Jim Rickard, who you should have on your show, the gold in New York could be commandeered by the U.S., so that the U.S. now has suddenly 14,000 tons of gold. They become, as Rickard refers to it, the Saudi Arabia of gold. So so gold becomes a big factor.
All right, stay there.
My contention is this.
I mean, let's talk about gold and silver on the other side and where you see that trend going.